In order to start the widget itself, find the widget here with the handy logo, right click it, and hit Run Editor Utility Widget. It will then appear as it does right here. Sometimes it might open with a different window size, but this is fairly scalable. 1, 2, 3, check, check. Today I will be demonstrating and talking about this widget that I've designed called Dynamic Damage, Decal and Destruction Utility. It's got a number of options. Let's see what they can do. So, zooming in our scene, we can do a whole number of things, but right now I'll be focusing on some of the utilities that you can use for destroying and modifying geometry itself. These are those over here, which will require you to own or have an artist version of Houdini, as well as the plugin. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to start Houdini, and then I'll connect my session. Now that my Houdini session is started, we can go back to over here and make sure that we have a session created and connected. It'll then tell us if it's worked. Sometimes it can be very temperamental. So, for this, there's a number of options here. I've got a surface and edge damager. This one is fairly ambitious and has had problems in the past with some very, very complicated meshes, especially if they have a lot of open faces. For instance, the pavilion likes to have issues with this one in particular. For that, I've also got a simple one, or two different simple ones, which can be used in those cases as they're a little bit less computationally intensive. First one I'll be trying to show off is the mesh weather and melt option. This one uses vellum grains in order to simulate it falling apart and melting. So I'm going to click on it, click on the object I want, click on mesh weather and melt, and it will spawn a Houdini HDA as well as some example geometry showing it off. Let it do its calculations, and here we have an example. You can use this example if you want to already make a lot of modifications. For that, you can go here to the Destroying tab, and it'll let you do all sorts of things. But if we want to go directly to our wall, we can go here, select Geometry Input, and instead go to a World Outliner input. For this, I now start my selection, hit the object I want, and say Use Selection. As it stands, we can go to the Destruction utility, and now we can change our time flow on this. As this is a running simulation, this essentially equates to your frames. So if I want this to go all the way, I'm going to set it to 240 and then let it do its thing. Good. We now have had this, and we can see it's fallen apart a little bit and distorted itself a bit more. Here we now have all sorts of additional options. If you want to, for instance, show off some of the geometry and see what it looks like underneath, you can turn on faceting normals, which then turns on so you can see what the underlying poly count is before smoothing. You can also change the amount of polygons you want to retain, or you can increase them to a lot larger. As well as additional modifications to things such as the grain size of the simulation, in case this is either too much or too little, or you need to have finer controls. On top of that, we can change our gravity, or even our wind strength and speed. If I, for instance, turn this to 0, instead, you will see it's not changing anything. That is because it does run a simulation. In case of this, set it back to 1, let it recalculate, and now it'll redo its simulation with the new variables. So I'll leave the fast setting on for now, and let's set this to 130. This is not done as a trans amount. If you want, for instance, reduce the stiffness, you could say reduce this to almost 0. Once again, hit frame 1, let it resimulate, go to, let's say, frame 115, and see what it does this time. It is now fallen down in place more. If I wanted to add more wind, let's say 2 or maybe even 2.5, we can do that. Once again, reset our simulation, take it all the way, and you will see it's actually bloated all the way over here, and has also done significantly more or different damage to it than you saw before. In fact, I always advise having at least a little bit of wind, because without the wind it stays fairly static. But increasing it too much means there's a good chance your geometry ends up all the way off screen because of the simulation running within Houdini. If I move this up a little bit, you can see it's also done a bit of damage around the edges. And if we now turn off our faceting, or decrease our poly count even more so, maybe turn off all smoothing, we can get this result. Or smooth it all the way, in which case it's more of a melt rather than a break apart effect. Now,